Okay, I want to start this out and say I'm done with the anti-axioms and the axioms for now. Um, and I've named this particular episode Get Perspective. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever done this exercise. Sometimes you see them, people giving speeches will do this. But you'll take your index finger and then below your chin, uh, rotate your index finger counterclockwise. And so when you're doing that counterclockwise, or you could do it clockwise, either way, whichever fits you. But if you're doing it counterclockwise, the thing that you will notice that if you raise your arm above your eyes, that counterclockwise is now uh, clockwise. And so it gives you the sense that different perspectives of things, people are witnesses of, accidents or, assaults and things like that can be a matter of the perspective that you have. And so you can see the same person looking at the same thing can see two totally different things depending on their perspective. Um, I kind of ran into this uh, last weekend or a couple weekends ago. Actually, my lawnmower died. I'm not really a mechanical person, but I do know all the tools from working in industrial distribution. So I was like, I ought to be able to fix this thing. Um, and it was an interesting exercise in a number of ways. I have a Honda motor on my lawnmower. It's a GCV 160. And this lawnmower, uh, I can tell the engine's very strong, but for whatever reason, it died out when I had started to cut the lawn a couple weeks ago. And so as I started to take it apart, I really didn't know what I was doing. So one of the good things about YouTube and other places that have videos is they give you a breakdown. There's a lot of people out there that have YouTube channels or Rumble channels that talk about these things. And so I watched someone or several people actually taking apart the carburetor because that seemed to be the source of the problem. This is after I've checked the spark plug, I've checked, the gas is another issue that you run into if you've left it uh, stored during the winter. Gas can go bad. But carburetor seemed to be kind of the general thing after I'd checked those or replaced them. And I still couldn't get the lawnmower started. So, I started to take this thing apart. And then one of the things I discovered was that a lot of the parts were dirty or old or whatever. And I wanted to get some new parts for that particular GCV 160. And, most of the videos I watched, all the carburetors looked the same to me, but it turned out that my lawnmower was just a little bit different than the others. And so some of the parts that I ordered wound up not working, but thankfully, the ones that I needed worked fine, and I was able to get the lawnmower started. And it's people will see things whether it's on YouTube or whatever, and they start to develop a perspective on what your expectation is when you start to tear something down like that. And it seemed perfectly legitimate. Everybody seemed to have the same type of uh, lawnmower or breakdown as far as the GCV 160, but mine was just a little bit different. Whether it was an older model or newer model, I'm not sure. I never got into that. But it just gives you an idea of how perspectives get developed because you think, hey, if I'm watching this video, it's got to be this. And not necessarily, although I have to say it did help to watch the videos. But I did also find some very cool ideas on that. And one really shifted my perspective too is into the lawnmower, the carburetor, typically you build everything on top of each other and then you you turn it over and you put it in, and then what I found was in doing that, if everything was such a tight fit, there were certain things that had to be attached, those types of things. I tore a gasket, that I had to order another gasket and a number of things. And then I watched a video that really changed my perspective. And that was, well, why don't you just buy the rods, and instead of bolting it things from the outside in, put the rods in first and then layer everything in coming out from the lawnmower. And that made it so much easier. It took me an hour and a half the first time when I put the carburetor on it in the way that it was manufactured. But when I put the rods in and then worked from the outside in, or basically inside out, because I'm putting starting from the lawnmower, putting the gasket on and then the shield and then another gasket and so forth. It just made it so much easier. And it was a great video for me, from changing my perspective about, oh, there's a better solution here. And, as I say in this channel all the time, there's always a better way. So anyway, perspectives are gained either from listening or hearing. And, executive perspective, it's, how it's built is typically from what I find are the two most common ways. One is spreadsheets of data, graphs, charts associated with it, maybe just an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it might be. And that certainly is one common source, but it begs the question, what's behind all that data? How was it built? What are the operational definitions of the data that are involved? And then the second thing is, I find the most common is there's some trusted sycophant, that works for you that will filter the information to you and develop your perspective around what Joe or Sue told you, within your company. And the larger the company, the more common that becomes, relying on data, relying on people you trust. And what I found through the years is the result of those two things is really not reality. It's not actually what's happening. And so part of the 95 method that I've put together is how to get a meaningful perspective, one that represents the reality around you. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate of taking 10 to 15% of your time each week. And I know it sounds like a lot, and especially a larger organization, the harder time I have with somebody in an executive office going to the front line, but going to the front line and actually listening, seeing what's happening at the front line, and not to make judgments, but just to listen and not go in with preconceived notions about the way it should be or anything. What you're trying to find out is the way that it is, and by seeing and hearing, then you can reflect after you've spent some time there about what did I just see against what did I believe was going on at the front line. And executives have told me that 90% of the time it doesn't match at all what they thought was happening. Doesn't matter whether they've worked in that position before at the front line. Doesn't matter how many years of experience that they have. There's just a disconnect between what is actually happening. And so that will lead to a whole series of things associated with why are these data not matching the reality of what's out there. And oftentimes there's an operational definition problem. Immediately find, for instance, in contact centers that 60% of the data will go, when somebody takes a phone call, if they have to categorize their phone call, are going to be, miscellaneous or other. That doesn't give you much information. And so you begin to ask better questions about what's actually happening within the organization, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get a true perspective. So remember, uh, you know, get perspective as an executive, not from spreadsheets or people that work for you, but from actually hearing and seeing on on your own what's happening at the front line between the customer and your organization. It is eye-opening most of the time, and it's really the only way that I've found through the years that executives can change their mind, because I can't change it. And that's one of the reasons a lot of times when I work with executives, I may be the first one in, and then I set them up for, you told me this, I saw this. See if you hear the same thing, see the same thing I saw, why I was sitting at the front line and what's happening. So that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way.